the Social Democrats. Deputy Roisin Shortall, please.
Thank you, Count Corda. At the outset, I want to join with other party leaders and members here in acknowledging the enormous national effort that we've seen over recent weeks, and to single out one particular person in that regard, and that is our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Tony Holohan, who we all owe an enormous debt of gratitude to. We're exceptionally lucky that we have somebody of that calibre who has insisted on operating on an evidence base, who comes from a huge background of expertise in the whole public health area, and who has incredibly remained calm and on top of the situation throughout this appalling crisis. It's interesting how, up to recently, an awful lot of people wouldn't have heard of public health. It is a very small aspect of our health service. It has traditionally been very underfunded. But we now see at this point of crisis just how critically important the whole area of public health is. Clearly, Dr. Holohan is supported by a team of experts working day and night in this area, and we owe them all a huge debt of gratitude. It's also very important, I think, to recognise all of the health workers in the broadest sense throughout our health and social care services. And I'm talking about frontline people, clinicians, all of the many support staff, and indeed the administrators. Very often administrators get a bad name, and we say there's too many of them. At a time like this, we're very glad that we have them to do all of that huge amount of organisational and administrative work that needs to be done. It's also important to acknowledge the huge effort that we've seen on the part of other government departments and state agencies. There's no question but that in the main, all of those public servants have put their shoulder to the wheel. They have done extraordinary things that wouldn't be seen or heard of in normal times. And I'm talking about very willingly agreeing to redeployment, working extra hours, very often putting their own health in danger as well. So we've seen an enormous effort. And what I believe we've seen is the public service at its best. And I think it's very important that we recognise the importance of public servants. And part and parcel of that is recognising the critical role of the state in any society or economy. And there are those proponents of a small state. But I would say to them, at this point of crisis, aren't we really grateful for the fact that we have a reasonably well-functioning state? And, let's learn lessons about the need to strengthen that state and ensure that no matter what issues arise, and no matter what crises or difficulties face us as a country, that we keep a central role for the state. Because what the state is about public provision. And, this current crisis absolutely underlines the need for public provision of services. And whether that is in the critical area of health and social care, or in relation to childcare, or housing, or protection for tenants, we now realise, if we didn't before, how essential it is that there is public provision of those key services. Sometimes people feel, well, public services are for the poor. And we know that that's not the case, and it should never be the attitude in society. Sometimes it's a case that it's for people who are therefore people are marginalised, and sure, everybody else pays their way. At a time of crisis like this, we see the importance of the provision of public services that are universally available. And I certainly hope that the work that has been done in recent days and weeks in terms of unifying the health service will be work that will never be undone in this country. And, Deputy Ryan has already referred to the question of sláinte care. And we've been told that what is happening now is, it was described as one senior official, that this is sláinte care on speed. And that is precisely what needs to be done. and let's keep it that way. It's about having a unified, single-tier public health service that is available to people when they need it, irrespective of what money they have in their pockets. And it's also about people pulling together. And the response from people with medical training from all over the world and in this country who may be working in other areas has been quite extraordinary and really, really encouraging in terms of the national effort and ensuring that, you know, everybody plays their part in providing services that are available to everybody and accessible. So let's learn those lessons. All of those things that I've mentioned already, healthcare, childcare, good public housing, all of those are public goods, and we must realise that into the future we have to support those as public goods, publicly provided. It's also important to recognise the role of the community and voluntary sector, which swung into place very, very quickly and is doing extraordinary work, whether, you know, GAA clubs, residents' associations, community groups, stepping up there very quickly to support older people, to support the vulnerable, and ensure that we're putting that kind of blanket of care around people. Most of all, of course, it is individuals who have responded most encouragingly, I think, to this crisis. People have taken it on themselves to take responsibility for their own health and safety, but more importantly, through their cooperation with the guidelines on social distancing and all of the other guidelines provided, taking responsibility for public safety and good public health. And that's a really encouraging thing, and I suppose it shows Irish people and people living in Ireland at their best. We also have to recognise, of course, the work of retail workers, suppliers, hauliers, all of those critical people who maintain the supply chains on which we're all so dependent, and they deserve our gratitude. At a political level also, I just want to say that there is a high level of cooperation, I think, across the political parties. Key to maintaining that, of course, is good communication. And communication must be open and it must be two-way. And that is absolutely essential. We are all in this together at every level in Irish society, and that means politically that we are in this together. And that is why I think it's in terms of approaching this crisis on that basis, we have had a high level of success to date, and there has been, you know, very little, if any, attempt to score political points. And it's essential that it continues like that. But, you know, for that to happen, it's really important that there is that openness, there is that kind of enthusiasm or determination to ensure timely responses to issues that are being raised by us right across this House. Because we are a filter for the public. Very often we're the first line of contact for people who are looking for information. If we are in a position where we're given good quality, timely information, we can disseminate that to our constituents and help in the national effort. But the other thing, of course, is that it is two-way then, because we are finding out at a very early stage where there are problems in relation to supplies, to services, to responses to government decisions that are taken. And it's really important that we have a mechanism for feeding those back into the policy area. So I would ask the government just to pay some attention to that. I mean, I appreciate everybody's under a lot of pressure, but we need to pay attention to that, because if we are to maintain the cross-party, united response to this crisis, that is absolutely essential. There are clearly huge issues in relation to procurement, right across all of the products that are required and required urgently. There's a worldwide, very competitive market. Obviously, the HSE are doing their utmost in that. Some particular individuals like Colin Henry especially is worth noting in terms of his efforts. But not only should we be accelerating those efforts, but the government also needs to play a role in accelerating efforts to produce and manufacture any of those products that we possibly can here. And I think probably more attention could be given to that. Look, The messages, I think, have been heard, and I think in the vast majority of cases there is a very positive response to those. There are outstanding issues in relation to childcare and how it is. We've talked about how childcare arrangements might be made for healthcare staff. That hasn't actually materialised yet. Also in relation to wage replacement, I'll reference that later. At a European level, the noises from Europe are positive, there's no doubt about that. We must insist on the principle of solidarity prevailing throughout this. Talk of the issue of Eurobonds or Corona bonds, and that is very welcome and needs to happen soon. But we must not ignore the lessons of the past, where when this country was in difficulty in the not too distant future, and there was severe austerity, the issue of who the burden falls upon is a critical issue, and we must learn the lessons of the past to ensure that when we come through this current crisis and we get into the point of recovery, that it is a recovery for everybody and that there aren't particularly vulnerable sections of our community that pay a heavier price than others. So we have to learn those lessons of the past. Finally, I would just say, I think the nightly figures that we're getting, if you can say it at this point, and I'd say it, very cautiously, those figures are holding reasonably firm. And that is thanks to the efforts of everybody throughout the country. It is really, really important that there's absolutely no complacency in this. While the figures are encouraging, there is still going to be a surge, and we're all, clear about the message about the need to flatten that curve and to ensure that when the surge comes that it's stretched out as long as possible so that our health services aren't overwhelmed. I just want to say to everybody involved at every level, thank you.